Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here and Happy New Year to you all. I hope it will be a good year for all of you and all of us. I'm excited to be part of another mentoring session with you all. Some of you may have been to sessions that I've facilitated before and will know a little bit about how I work. And some of you may be new, so yes, welcome. I like to work in a way that provokes and stimulates some conversation. And it's great if any of you bring questions or thoughts in terms of some of the ideas that I introduce today. So if you'd like to intervene at any point, or if you have a question, you can just raise your hand. I think it's possible, under the reactions button. You can raise a hand if you want, and I'll try and respond to any questions or thoughts you have. And if you do contribute in that way, it makes for a more stimulating and interactive conversation. So I look forward to that. We are going to work for around an hour and a half or so. We may take a 2-3 minute leg stretch after about an hour, just to allow you to stretch your legs or get a new cup of coffee or whatever you need. I'll work with you then through till probably around 2:30, depending on how the conversation goes. And the theme today is really around, in the workplace, managing up, managing down. And I would also say managing side to side as well, managing relationships with people parallel to you, maybe in another silo or in your department as well. So it's really around how to manage those kind of relationships. And the reason we put them together, managing up, managing down, managing sideways, is really because they are not very different in terms of some of the ideas and tips that I will share with you. They would apply to all these different relationships that you have at work. So we will look at managing up, managing down, and managing sideways as well. And I think the first thing I would say is that in the workplace, you can be very good at many things. You can be technically very skilled, very competent in terms of what you are required to do. But perhaps the most important success factor at work is going to be, and probably is, the relationships that you have with the people around you. Those relationships are going to determine really your success or failure sometimes in the workplace. However technically skilled you are, however good your degrees are, but if you are working as a professional person, those relationships and the commitments you make to the people around you are going to be what determine your ultimate success at work and as a professional person. So that's really just to introduce what we're going to talk about today. It's how to make those relationships work. And I just thought I'd stop here immediately at this point and just ask if there are any questions or any immediate reactions to what I'm saying. So please don't be shy. Maybe I'm telling you all things that you already know so far, or maybe it's new to some of you. But I'd just be interested to hear what's any immediate reactions or thoughts. It's good to see so many of you joining. Thank you. Jesse, yes, welcome. You have to unmute.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was related to this topic, is that previously in other management seminars and things that I've viewed in the past, one of the common ideas between them is that the most technically gifted person in an organization doesn't necessarily make for the best manager. because sometimes you might have a high IQ but lacking in the EQ department. And so sometimes that gets in the way of effective management.
Yes. Thanks, Jesse. It's certainly true. And I think what we're looking at here is really the soft skills of management. And certainly as you move up the line, the soft skills are the leadership skills that are needed in an organization. The soft interpersonal relational skills, often harder. They're called soft skills, but often they are the harder skills to learn and the things that are not well taught at university or where you received your qualifications. These soft skills are what determine success for managers and certainly leaders. As you rise in the organization and you move into leadership positions, the other people who you are competing with will also have the technical qualifications that you might have. What is going to make the difference is a portfolio of softer relational skills that are important for professionals who wish to succeed and advance in their careers. Thanks, Jesse. Other thoughts? Any other thoughts, anyone? Don't be shy. Okay, well, listen, I'm going to share a few thoughts then to advance the conversation. And I suppose one of the interesting things when we look at managing relationships, managing up, managing down, managing sideways, is the idea of managing up. Because our traditional idea of thinking about the organization is that the people above us manage us, so they are managing down. And then people like me come along and talk about the need to manage upwards, which is kind of reversing the polarity that we are used to. And how can that be? I suppose it comes about because our thinking about organizations is changing. And in the past, the organization was thought of as rather like a pyramid, where the senior people are at the top, a few of them, and other people are further down the line and have to be managed and told what to do and need to be instructed as to how to solve problems and so on. And of course, that thinking is rather old-fashioned. And nowadays, the organization is more of a matrix structure because we are working in a much more complex environment where the people who actually know what to do and what needs to be done and how to solve problems are actually lower down the organization. And the people at the top very often have no idea or very little idea about what actually needs to be done to make things work effectively. So that points to the need for really good communication, both downwards and upwards in the organization, so that the organization can move forward effectively, can solve problems, and know what needs to be done. It requires people to be able to communicate effectively both ways, up and down. And that changes a lot of the traditional thinking in organizations that was based on the idea that the people at the top knew what needed to be done and just had to pass the instructions down the line and manage people below them. And now that is more or less on its head. And we have to talk to people above us about what needs to be done and what they need to do to make it possible. So it's an interesting idea, I suppose, because we think that the people above us are paid much more and they should know more than we do and tell us what to do. And in fact, that doesn't really work in quite the way that it used to do. And I think it's based particularly on the idea of complexity in organizations, that we are dealing in a complex, rapidly changing environment that is too much for a single person to be able to manage on their own. Just as a country is too complex for a president to be able to manage or lead entirely on their own without a good team around them. And we invest so much in the person at the top, as if they are the ones who can solve every problem. And obviously we know from looking around us in the world that that's not possible, that the individual at the top, the individual leader or manager, is too removed and too disconnected very often from what is really going on and what really needs to be done to make things work effectively. So we have to take away our admiration in some ways for the singular leader and decide that we, more in the middle or in lower parts of the organization, have as much responsibility for making things work. So just to explore that with people, how do you all feel about what I'm saying so far? Because this is a responsibility I'm now putting on your shoulders to be part of deciding what needs to be done. Inviting you to step into managing and leading. Jesse, does this make sense in terms of what you were saying before?
Yes, it does. It does. It does also highlight the fact that, you talk about effective communication is necessary.
Yeah.
But one thing I do find that can be a problem in business is that those above may still believe in the old school hierarchy of the pecking order. And so unfortunately, I've seen before where now you've got more junior members try to speak up, but managers struggle to actively listen and take in what they're saying to help move whatever process forward.
That's certainly true, because people still have, many people, particularly the more senior and the older people, still have very old-fashioned ideas about how things have to be, and can isolate themselves sometimes from people at lower levels, but end up being relatively unsuccessful as a result, because they're not in touch with what's really going on, we find. So how we're going to communicate, and we'll talk about some of this, how you're going to communicate with those more senior people is going to be part of what we have to do if we're managing upwards. I'm just going to see if there are other names I recognize here. Ayanda, hi, welcome. You've been here before, I think, at some of our sessions. So just wondering what you think so far. Ayanda, can you hear me? I'm picking on you, I'm sorry. Or anyone else, any thoughts?
Mark, if I can just add from my side,
Yes.
interrupt this
Thanks.
side. It's definitely very relevant what you're saying at the moment. I think from a lot of my experiences in the industry in general, you're often in the situation where just geographically you're far removed from your teams or your subordinates or team members or managers. So it makes the importance, it definitely highlights the importance of effective communication. And I think that's always something that, for me personally, I'm actively trying to improve, because that, you don't know what's going on the ground when your team is out there. And I've been on the other side also. Obviously, when I started out, you often can feel like you're stuck in the middle of nowhere with very little communication, and so it's the most important thing, I would say, for a successful program.
Thanks, Natalie. And I think the fact that there is more and more remote working generally at work, and also if people are in the field and so on, that makes for more distance and separation between people and their managers or whoever. And one of the things that it points to, which is an important part of managing relationships generally, managing up, down, and sideways, is the importance of having a clear agreement on what people are working on, clear objectives, clear goals on all sides, and knowing what the expectations are on all sides is really important if you don't see people every day, because otherwise gaps can emerge or people are working from different understandings and perspectives. So one of the things that becomes particularly important with remote working is that when you do meet with people or you do have conversations with people in your team or who are managing you, to have really good clarity on what the goals and objectives are for the time when you will not be seeing each other every day. And so that's a really important part of this. Natalie, Ayanda, sorry, you're struggling with some connection issues, I think, but I hope you can hear me. Yeah, so I think one of the things I would say, and let's take it from the perspective of managing upwards to start with. Managing your manager, which sounds like a contradictory thing, but is so important. And I think one of the things that I would share here is this idea that your manager is also trying to achieve things just as you are. And just as you expect guidance from your manager or your supervisor, you can also step into the idea of how can you support them to achieve their objectives. And this is a key aspect of the idea of managing upwards. Knowing what your manager is trying to achieve and finding out how you can best support them is a critically important aspect of managing up. And it goes to an idea that I sometimes share with you in these sessions, which is that the very things you want to achieve for yourself at work, you have to try and help other people to achieve. It's a kind of counterintuitive idea that what you most want for yourself, which is to be successful, to have a good profile, to be recognized, to be valued, and so on, and to learn, these are the things you have to encourage other people to do and to support other people to do. In a nutshell, I suppose if you want to be a leader, you have to help other people to lead and encourage other people to lead around you and to support other people in their leadership. So what you most want for yourself, you have to support other people to do. And that is at the core of the idea of a lot of what I say, and particularly a core of the idea that if you want to be successful, you have to help your manager to be successful. Okay, so you have to find out what they are trying to achieve and what is the best way of supporting them to achieve and to be successful. And then you step into being successful yourself and being recognized yourself for the contribution that you make. So it's a strange idea, but it's a powerful idea generally about life, which is the things you most want in life and in work, you have to give away to other people. So if you want to be a leader, you have to help other people to lead. And that means a conversation, critically, these are very practical things that are important. A conversation with your manager around what, please tell me, manager, or please tell me, my supervisor, what are you trying to achieve, or what is most important for you in the next 3, 6 months, 1 year, and how can I support you to achieve those things? Is a wonderful conversation to be able to have with a manager, even an old-fashioned manager, Jesse, who's stuck in the old kind of ways, is still trying to achieve certain things. And if they know that you're trying to support them to achieve those things, that's going to help you to know what you need to be doing by asking that question, seeking to support your manager or your supervisor to achieve what they want to do. Ayanda, you've got your hand up. Thank you. I hope you can hear well.
Hi, Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about earlier. I think there was a problem with my headset.
It's okay, I can hear you well.
Yeah, I just want to confirm if I'm hearing correctly. I mean, the idea of managing upwards, is it providing support then to your manager? Is it core to that idea of actually managing upwards?
Yes, it's because you're taking responsibility for the relationship with your manager and taking responsibility for ensuring that you are doing what they really need you to be doing. And that almost irrespective of your job description, I would in some ways put that to one side. Please, Mr. Manager or Ms. Manager, can you share with me what you're really trying to achieve over the next short period, and how can I best support you to do that? Is a very powerful question.
Okay.
Because you're not disconnected, you're part of the team, and they are trying to achieve certain things, we presume. And also sometimes it's about recognizing that they themselves want to be in the limelight and to be recognized and to do the very things that you want for yourself. So it's how you make the connection around what needs to be done.
And then where does the line sit? Is there such a thing as now, overstepping and, making the manager now start to feel like you're managing them, that sort of thing?
Well, look, I suppose what I'm pointing to and what we will cover today is more how we step out of a traditional way of thinking around management.
Okay.
And the traditional way of thinking around management is that one would wait and be told what to do. And there may be some managers who will still prefer that it works like that and who don't want to make connection. That is unfortunate if they are still a bit stuck. But generally, even I think with some of the more old-fashioned managers that are there, generally, if you step into trying to support them and make it clear that you want to support them to achieve their objectives, and they will, I think, normally respond in a way that is helpful. At least you get to know a little bit more about the relationship with the person who's really responsible for managing you. But this initial question, how can I best support you, can, if it's handled in a mature way on all sides, lead then to follow-on conversations about what you need to be able to support your manager best in terms of feedback, in terms of maybe resources, or whatever else is going to make your work effective in terms of supporting them. So this is new and it's a little bit different, and some of the more old-fashioned managers may not easily get it in some ways. But generally, I think you are going to create the potential for a productive working relationship if you step into trying to support them as your first step. How can I best support you? And I've seen this work effectively many times, because you're not looking for something for yourself in the first instance. You're looking to support them to achieve their objectives. Yeah. Other thoughts? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? Okay, so the first step then really is understanding from your perspective what your own manager is trying to achieve. What your own manager is trying to achieve, and then thinking, they may not always give you much advice, what they need from you, but then nonetheless thinking about how you can step into supporting them to what you believe they are seeking to achieve. Because then you are stepping into the idea that we are a team and that we're trying to move forward together. And in that, then really the idea of developing a positive and productive working relationship with your manager. And by the same token, then also because we are working in a more loose, more matrix, sometimes disconnected system, which is now characterizing the world of work. It's also useful to know what the people on all sides of you are trying to achieve, people in other departments and silos, what are they trying to achieve? And also thinking, and sometimes having a conversation with them as to how can we, where we sit, help you to do what you, where you sit, are trying to achieve as well. What do you need from us? What can we contribute? And so on. So making yourself relevant and useful to the people on different sides of you as well. And it also goes to managing downwards. So people managing downwards need to be supporting you. So being clear for yourself as a supervisor and as a manager, sometimes of teams or other people maybe below you, what you need them to do to be able to support you to achieve what you need to do. So this is around creating mature conversations all around you, around what needs to be done here and how can we support each other best. Offering support to people above you, asking for support from people below you. And when you are asking for support from people below you, then saying, and also what do you need from me so that you can contribute to my objectives. So it's the manager has a responsibility often to provide the resources and create the working environment that enables success. So just as you ask people to support you, you are also offering what they need, asking what they need to be able to work effectively with you and to support your objectives. And if you have a mature manager above you, they should also be saying, thank you for offering me support to achieve what I need to do, and how can I best make it possible for you to do that? So this creates a mature working relationship if you can do these things. Not always easy, but better than just sitting and saying nothing. The other thing then, I suppose, connected with this, please raise your hands at any point, anyone, if you have questions or if you're not sure about what I'm saying. But the other point connecting with this is that we do have, obviously, people who have different working styles, different ways of connecting. And some managers are more hands-off. They just expect you to know and get on with things. And they don't give you feedback very often. Some people like to be much more involved. Some people also like to micromanage. So there's a whole range of management styles that are there that you have to get used to. And they're not all bad. Some of them might be difficult to adapt to, but people have ways of working that work for them. And it's very useful to be able to understand with your manager, and also people in other parts of the system around you, what are their preferred ways of working? What are their styles of managing? And how can I step into understanding that? And what does it mean for how I work? So if you have a manager, for example, who is micromanaging and it's getting frustrating for you, to be able to see sometimes that it can be valuable. Sometimes it's good to have people who have good attention to detail. And how can I welcome this particular manager, even though she or he might be micromanaging me a little bit, but how can I see the value of that and step into that and respond effectively? Sometimes they just need to know what's going on. That's why they're micromanaging, because they don't completely trust or know what you're up to. So giving regular feedback to them, giving regular reports to them about what you're doing can sometimes enable them to step back a bit from feeling the need to micromanage. So I guess what I'm saying here is that it is very valuable to understand the particular style or way of working that somebody has, and then to be able to adapt and respond accordingly to how they like to manage. Sometimes managers are much more hands-off and aren't looking for reports regularly or just trust you to get on with things. And it is still useful then sometimes to give them updates, even though they may not be looking for them, because it will, yeah, just keep them comfortable with what's happening. If they don't know how really otherwise to approach you. But if you take the initiative to give people feedback on what you're doing, and then sometimes asking for a response. Are we going in the right direction? Am I giving you what you want? Is also useful. So in that sense, again, you are managing up without telling your manager what to do. Asking for feedback sometimes is also part of managing upwards, because managers are often afraid of giving feedback. If you ask for it, it's sometimes useful. Yeah. So we talked about trying to understand what your manager is trying to achieve, and then to support that, developing a positive and productive working relationship, and learning and adapting to your manager's style or way of working is a third useful aspect to think about. With that, I suppose also, as the relationship matures, being able to communicate what works best for you with your manager. For example, being able to say, I really appreciate when you can give me some regular feedback on how I'm performing. And I want to know that I'm going in the right kind of direction. And if you as my manager can support me with that feedback, I would really value it. Also managing upwards, but trying to make the relationship work effectively for you and for your manager. So communicating what works well for you. Anticipating what your manager needs, sometimes if they don't say it. But as you get to know your supervisor or your manager, you start understanding what they need, what they're looking for, and then being able to step into anticipating that. So a manager who needs regular updates, provide the regular updates, because then you're responding to what you anticipate your manager will need or will ask for. Don't wait to be asked if you know that's the question they're going to ask you. Seeking the feedback, then also a very important part. Positive and negative. So feedback, of course, isn't always a negative thing and does not have to be confined to an annual performance review or anything like that. Feedback is something that can happen day in and day out at the workplace. And asking for feedback is good. And this, again, is not just for your manager, but also people below you. Is it possible, guys, if I can give you some feedback? Is a good question to ask your team. So opening the door for regular formal and informal feedback sessions is incredibly valuable. The feedback conversations are some of the more important conversations that we actually have at the workplace. We often fear them because they're not done well, or they come out of the blue, or that sometimes they don't happen at all until your annual performance review. It's too late, because things that happened 8 months ago have been forgotten and you've moved on and grown since then anyway. So the idea of regular informal and formal feedback sessions is incredibly valuable in terms of creating a learning, productive working relationship with people above and below you. So to be able to put the feedback question onto the agenda with your manager, again, a really good part of managing up, but also to take it into the other relationships as well. I've covered quite a few ideas here in a short time. I'm just wondering what you're thinking now. Any responses or thoughts? Jesse again, yes, hi.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to ask what your opinion would be then on your smaller organizations where you don't have a large gap between most junior and most senior, so where it's all mostly lateral. In this kind of feedback sense, do you think that it should be the same? Because I also sometimes find that sometimes maybe people's egos get in the way of receiving feedback from someone of the same level?
Yeah, look, I think even in smaller or more informal working environments, the feedback conversations are very important. They might not always be called that. And it might be just bumping into somebody over a cup of coffee or something like that. How did our presentation go this morning? Oh, I think it went well because we did this or that. That kind of conversation is very valuable. And I think to embrace it and also to not just accept, no, it was fine, everything's okay, is a kind of pushing away statement in some ways. We need feedback conversations where you can go beyond that and people will say to you, no, you did very well, Mark, and I think you can improve it next time by doing X, Y, and Z. That's much more helpful. And yeah, or you weren't at your best today, Mark. What is something going on? What, you didn't seem to be as good as you can be sometimes. Those kind of conversations are helpful. And that's real feedback instead of just saying, no, everything is fine, which is not really supporting someone to improve. And I think in smaller informal working environments, being able to have those regular, real conversations on the basis of wanting your colleagues around you to improve and do better all the time, that's incredibly valuable. And you might not even refer to it as feedback, but it's just a conversation that goes beyond how did we do? No, everything's fine, which doesn't really help. You need somebody to be able to say to you, it was okay, I think you could do better by doing X, Y, and Z. Much more helpful. And knowing also that that's not just a one-way conversation from a manager downwards, but the conversation can go both ways. So just as somebody can give helpful feedback to you, you can also sometimes give helpful feedback to them. And then you are creating a real environment in which feedback is just an accepted part of how you do business. After every meeting or after every presentation, you're having a conversation around how did we do, how could we have improved it, what could we have done better, is a regular part of the organizational culture that you can create, particularly in a smaller working context. And to move beyond egos, I think. And if someone gives feedback to you, can I give some feedback back to them? Positive or negative?
Okay,
I could say
so
a little bit. Does that help? Sorry, Jesse, yes.
yeah, so I was just going to say, so in essence, in this case, it's practice makes permanent to create that culture where egos don't even need to be a factor in the situation because it's a common practice.
It's a common practice and it goes both ways and always and every week, every day. Part of how we work is we give feedback to each other in a way that is trying to support and encourage the other person to be great, which goes back to the idea I spoke about earlier, is that what you also want to be great. So you have to help other people to be great. So by giving them good feedback, it's a good start. I'll spend another minute or two just on the feedback conversations because they are so important. Feedback is often feared because it can be negative or just critical. People feel undervalued generally at work, and then the manager comes in and tells them that they're not as good as you thought they were, or you thought you were. So we have this idea, and it goes back to the old-fashioned way of thinking around organizations, that feedback is generally going to be critical, it's generally going to come down from my manager, and I'm going to try and avoid it as much as possible. And it's based on the idea that feedback is usually seen as what I would call a deficit approach, which is I'm looking for gaps in the people I manage and I want to tell them what their gaps are and what they have to do to improve, or I'm going to train them to do the things they're not very good at. So I'm always looking for what's wrong in some ways as a manager. It's funny because we recruit people because they're great and they're good and we like their CVs, and then we've managed them traditionally looking for what's wrong and what they're not so good at, which is a real shame in some ways. So we have to move away from this deficit, gaps-based approach to giving feedback and use what I call an appreciative approach to feedback. And the appreciative approach is more looking at the whole person, looking for their strengths and what they're good at and what they excel at every day, in addition to areas where they can improve. So the appreciative approach is a much more empowering way of thinking around the relationship. I want the people who work for me to be really good, so I'm going to tell them what I think they're really good at, and also highlight areas where sometimes they can improve. But I'm going to start by valuing them. So the conversation around the presentation could be to say, I really liked the way you were able to keep to your time, for example, in delivering the presentation. I really liked the way you managed the slides and so on. And I think you could have put a bit more energy in as well. So I'm giving a whole bunch of feedback, but it starts with what I think the other person is doing really well. And then also maybe points to some areas where they can improve and strengthen what they do. It's what I would call an appreciative approach to feedback that starts with valuing the other person and what they're great at and telling them. You can't just assume people know, because sometimes nobody's had feedback for years. So tell people what they're really good at and value them for that, and then invite them to improve in certain ways going forward is very powerful. Yeah, it's moving away from a deficit approach to feedback into an appreciative way of thinking around feedback. Yeah. Devuyo, thank you very much for your chat there. Really, ultimately, the feedback conversation is one that goes both ways. Again, this is the managing up, managing down relationship. A good manager who understands the value of feedback and giving it in this appreciative way would also be asking for feedback themselves from you. So it goes up and down. This is so important. Yeah, thoughts, ideas. It's good to see so many of you here today. Thanks, everyone, for being here. The feedback conversation. I didn't know we'd spend so much time on feedback, but I think it is really valuable to think about it. And sometimes with the more old-fashioned managers, it doesn't happen like this, but at least you have the opportunity to do it with the people in your team, the people around you, and maybe people in other departments. If you see people doing great stuff, then tell them, you're doing really great stuff. Well done. I'd like to learn from you is another good question. I'd like to learn from you about how you do something because you seem to do it so well. Is another way of valuing somebody by inviting them to help you and to step into your own learning needs. So I'm just going to recap on some of the ideas we've covered, and then some of you may have some questions or responses. First of all, for those of you who might not have been here right at the beginning, we're talking about managing these workplace relationships, managing up, managing the relationship with your manager or supervisor, managing down with your teams and the people maybe below you, managing sideways with your peers or with people in other departments or in other silos of the organization. To be able to talk and have good conversations with them is also very important. And we started off with talking about the idea of trying to understand and support what your manager is trying to achieve. And the conversation with your manager, which goes along the lines of What are your key objectives for the next period, and how can I support you to achieve those things? Very valuable. Building and developing from there, or starting from there, to build a positive, productive working relationship where you have alignment between what you are seeking to do and what your manager is seeking to do. And sometimes it's about helping other people to shine. This is the way we start to shine ourselves, by helping other people to shine. And the idea there being that the things you most want at work, you have to support other people to do. Giving away what you most want to give it to other people. That's how to get it back, ultimately yourself. Learning and adapting to your own manager's style or ways of working. Very important. Because some people have different management styles, and they may not be what you are most comfortable always or most happy with, but learning to adapt to that and recognize that some managers are more hands-off. Some expect you to take more responsibility and not to be told what to do all the time, and so on. Different management styles. And then stepping into that and seeing how you can adapt your own patterns and ways of working into alignment with how your manager likes to work and probably expects you to work as well. We spoke about communicating what works well for you then also in that relationship, particularly with your manager. It's really great if you can give me some feedback every week or every month so that I know that I'm contributing what you want and what you expect from me. So I would really like to get regular feedback from you. Communicating what you would really like and what will help you to be effective. Anticipating what your manager needs, also part of it. It seems that my manager likes to get a regular report from me, then I must be ready to do that without always being asked, which becomes frustrating for the manager. And then the feedback conversations, again, all round, become incredibly valuable in terms of developing productive learning, working environments to be in, building that kind of culture. Those are the kind of broad themes that we covered. And then also right at the beginning, I spoke about this idea of being very clear always about objectives, goals, targets that you are trying to reach with your manager, with your team, especially when people are working remotely. Sometimes you're in the field for a long period of time as a geologist, and you can become disconnected from other people in your team or from your manager. But having a very clear, defined set of objectives, timeframes, and targets, which can be agreed when you do meet, so that when you go away or when you're apart from each other, everybody has a very clear sense of what needs to be done. Is having that clarity on objectives and what we're all going to do and what we're all seeking to achieve is incredibly valuable. So let me just stop there. I've given you a bit of a summary and just see if there are any questions or any thoughts. Don't be afraid to raise a question. It's probably a question that other people may also have. So you won't be alone. And this is how we learn best, by the way, by raising questions. And by the way, I don't mind silence, as you can see. I'm comfortable with silence. But it's actually also a key, sorry.
I'm sorry, it's Linda here.
Linda,
And
hi, welcome. Yes.
Welcome, and thank you so much for especially the idea of the starting a conversation with an appreciation.
Yeah.
And I am from academia. Most of the colleagues here are maybe from the industry, but I am a teacher at the university. So I deal with managers on top of me or colleagues, but mostly I deal with students. And although I am a supervisor, I'm kind of a manager. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how can I actually get the student to understand that even if they're in a university, a supervisor is a manager, and they have to get empowered so to use me for their benefit and also how can I meet me? I don't know actually how to formulate the question, but sometimes when I get to deal with honors or master or PhD students, maybe PhD students are more independent, but for masters, they are kind of thinking still as a student, and they don't realize actually that they have to do themselves the work and start to become a little bit empowered, because it's not a real job, but actually it is. So can you please advise me, how can I actually get this conversation to these students so that they understand that even if this university is a job, and they can start to apply themselves so that they can learn skills to apply when they are in the real world. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely question. Thanks, Linda. Thanks for being here. I think my starting point is always that, especially if it's a university, but all organizations nowadays need to be what I would call learning organizations, where we work and learn together. So, and my starting point behind that, before I get onto the detail of your question, is this idea that was promoted by someone called Peter Senge in the 1990s, when he said that successful organizations these days have to be learning organizations, and that your ability, your success as an organization and to be better than your competitors is predicated on the idea that you have to learn smartly and faster than your competitors. And that every organization in some ways needs to be in the learning business. How can we do things better? How can we improve this system or this process? These are powerful questions to ask. And then I think, Linda, to get specifically onto the relationship with students, helping them to be the co-creators of their own learning is the most important thing. That when you get to the master's level or the doctorate level, they have to be in a situation where they're not going to be taught every day. There isn't a teacher standing in front of them every day telling them stuff, teaching them in that sense. They move from the idea of being taught in a classroom to being sort of self-directed and self-motivated learner. So I think that, and then of course you have to take responsibility for your own learning. Everyone as a professional these days has to be responsible for their own growth and learning and development. So I think the conversation with the students starts with the idea that the supervisor, or whoever it is, has to be able to ask those questions. What are you learning in terms of what you are doing? What are you finding out? What are you discovering? Can you share with me some of your own insights that you are gaining? And they have to be able to step into having a conversation with you based on that idea. And as the more you promote that idea of using questions, and that's why I come back to the idea of even questions in this context, but using questions with people to explore what is going on, what are they learning about, and encouraging them to enter into the conversation with you is going to be the first step in terms of empowering them to understand that no longer is it a question of somebody with a whiteboard instructing people, but that we all have to take responsibility for our own learning and development. I think, Linda, that would be my starting point. So to work a lot with questions.
Yes,
and
thank you.
Not so much teaching people, but facilitating their own learning is really your role, I think, in the university. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much,
thanks.
Mark.
Yeah. So, and then I would come back and say that even in this context, the real opportunity for learning and growth is when we are able to have dialogue together. Because I'm not the only expert in what happens in organizations, and all of you have your own experiences, and you're all adults, and this is not a classroom of primary students. So that means we have to have dialogue. And that means that the questions and the conversations, even interacting with each other here, is also allowed and possible to create that kind of dialogue where we recognize that we are learning together about how to do this kind of stuff. Yeah, so again, I'm opening it up for discussion, dialogue, questions that you may have. Because I also learn from these processes, and one of the reasons why I do this work is because as I interact with people, I continually also learn about what are the challenges that people are facing and what are the opportunities for moving forward. So, any thoughts? I also tend not to call on people because that's a bit like going back to the classroom where the teacher calls out people's names. It's horrible. Much better if you come with your own question when you are ready. You can wave your hand, anyone. I hope you all feel you're learning something by being here. I also need some feedback, you see. Tabang, yes, welcome. Tabang, I'm not sure if I can hear you yet. I can see your hand up. Tabang, you can maybe put the question in a chat because we don't seem to be able to hear you at the moment. Other questions? Okay, listen, I think what we'll do, it's now a minute or so to 1 o'clock. Let's take a 3-minute leg stretch, if that's okay. And let's come back at about 2 minutes past 1, and we'll reconvene at that point. Is that okay with everyone? Take a short break. Reconvene 3 minutes past. Thanks, Ayanda. That's great. Thank you. Okay, short break. Okay, I'm back. I hope you can all still hear me. It's good to have such great participation and attendance today. And just to pick up where I was leaving off, is to talk about this idea of working with questions. Because, again, it goes back to the idea that with the organization in the past, people were just told what to do. Nobody had to ask any questions. Nobody had to question their managers or anything like that, because you were just there to do your part on the production line. And the manager was the one who's responsible for setting up the production line, making sure that everybody knew what they had to do and get on with it and start the work. And because the nature of organization is changing, we live in a much more complex world. Our organizations are more complex, fast moving. Everyone has access to information. It's no longer the case that the manager just can tell people what to do. The manager also sometimes needs to be questioned or challenged. And we have to create a culture where it's okay to ask questions, and that this is what is really going to support the learning process. I think for leaders and managers in organizations, the most important skills almost are these soft skills of being able to ask questions, to find out what's going on, to know what needs to be done, asking questions, and also to be able to listen deeply and well to what people are saying. So I'm talking about deeper listening, which is not just having your ears open, but looking for body language, looking for signs, understanding, reading the room, and so on. This kind of deep listening and being able to respond to questions that people ask is so important for leaders these days. And I think I would encourage you as young professionals to be able to step into this idea of working with questions, which can often lead the way. Working with questions and listening deeply, exploring how things are, is incredibly valuable. And to be able to practice it is really, really important as well. Because otherwise we don't really know what's happening. We don't really know what's happening. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'll give you an example of what I mean. If I hold this up to you, I can hold this up, and you may think you know what it is, but you're only looking at it from one angle, from where you sit. And to really understand what this is, you have to ask me questions about it. This is the kind of metaphor for problems and challenges that we face in the world of work. We only see the problem or the challenge from where we sit. Somebody else may see it from where they sit. It looks different. It looks different. And only by talking to other people about how they see the problem or the situation do we find out, and can we possibly learn what it really is, which is a remote for my air conditioning system. So organizations are like this. We only see the problem from where we sit, and it only gives us a very partial view. So we have to really be able to connect well with managers, supervisors, people around us, to understand how they see situations from where they sit. Otherwise, it's like this business of the child feeling the leg of the elephant. Does not help you to understand what shape an elephant is until you explore it from other angles or other directions, or from how other people see it. Does that make any sense? It's so important in this complex world in which we live that we understand the views of other people around us, to get a fuller picture, and then to know how the problem can be solved or how the challenge can be addressed. Questions? it's also about making meaning, I think, of what people are saying. Trying to make meaning of what Mark is talking about is very important for all of you. And sometimes not even just to take it at face value. It's only my perspective. I'm an old-fashioned kind of white guy from the baby boomer generation. So I only see the world from where I sit. So I need to hear how all you people see it as well. Yeah. I'm just reading a message from Tabang. I just like to ask about when you are dealing with a manager with different technical background from a different technical department, and you have to persuade them to make certain decisions. How would you go about that? I'm assuming this will be the upward management, but not from the same department. Tabang, it's a really good question. Manager from a different technical background, and you have to persuade them to make certain decisions. They're in another department. That's a great question. And I think it comes down to this again, which is one of the things I'm saying, which is that when you want someone to do something or to behave in a certain way, you have to move away from telling or persuading them what to do, but to ask them how they see it. So this is again moving away from just focusing on your needs and your interests, but focusing on what their needs and interests are. How would they like to approach the problem? And how could you contribute to that? So I think I would step away from the idea of seeking to persuade them, but to enter into a dialogue with them around how they see the problem, or how they see the situation that needs to be dealt with, and what they think the best response would be, and creating a dialogue with the other person, with the technical manager, on that basis, which is valuing their input and their contribution. And there is just a chance that they will also at some point say, well, how do you see it? And then you have the opportunity to co-create something, rather than just saying it needs to be done like this or it needs to be done like that. To move towards co-creation on the basis of dialogue is the approach to take. I don't know if that helps, but I think it's in keeping with what I'm saying around, not seeing it as someone having to be told something, but seeking to explore how they would like to approach it and how you can contribute to that. And then you have a chance of moving forward together, rather than trying to make somebody do what you think is the right answer. I don't know if that helps, Taban, but that's what I have, I think, on that one. Yeah. You can give me a thumbs up or something if it's useful. Other thoughts, questions? I like that question very much, by the way. Lufuno, yes, welcome. You like that answer?
Yes, Mark, I do like the answer.
Yeah.
Thank
What do
you.
you think about what I'm saying?
Yeah, I must say, yeah, it's very much informative because somehow, even though it is hard to maybe lead to a decision making to your senior, but what you're saying here is it sounds convincing. We can protect. We can at least maybe practice that.
Thank you. You see, if you take this approach of exploring how they would see the problem or what they would think is the best answer, you involve them, but you also value them as well in the process. You help them to feel valued at work and the contribution they can make, which is also going to strengthen the relationship between you and them, because they know that you value them by seeking their contribution and input. And there's more chance that they will also ask you what you think as well, then, if you go about it that way. So when I spoke earlier about building a positive and productive working relationship with your manager or with other people around you, I think what I'm saying here is that usually at work, there are a couple of things happening simultaneously. There is something that needs to be done, or a problem that needs to be solved, or a change that needs to be made in how something works in the organization. That's what I would call the work of the organization. The work of the people in the organization is to do certain things. But then there's something else happening simultaneously to that, which is the relationship between the people who are doing the work. And both of those things need to be working well. The work needs to happen well, but also the relationship as you're doing the work needs to simultaneously happen. And what I point to is the idea, a very powerful idea, that as you work with people and review the work that you are doing with people, it is also incredibly valuable to review the relationship you have with people who you're doing the work with, because very few places or organizations can you work completely on your own anymore. And as you seek to be successful in your work, it is powerfully important to be able to also believe that you also want to improve the relationships with the people that you work with, so that you are successful both in the work, but also simultaneously in the relationships with the people you work with. And as a professional person, to be able to, almost on a daily basis, as you work with people, say, though the work seemed to go well today, and also I seem to have strengthened my relationship with Tabang or whoever as I was doing the work. So to be able to both focus on the work, but also simultaneously taking this kind of helicopter view about, did it also improve the relationship in terms of how I worked with people today? Do I feel I've strengthened my relationship with that different department, even though the manager is from a different technical background or whatever? So to focus, as I'm saying, both on the work, but also on the relationships with the people that you work with is a very important and powerful idea, and will enable you to be increasingly successful yourself, as well as contributing to the success of others with you. All about managing relationships, as you can tell from what I'm saying. Yeah, questions again. Opening it up. I love the questions so far. Don't be shy. This is how we learn. No right and wrong answers, obviously, or no right and wrong questions. Oh, graveyard shift, people. Okay, maybe I'll just share a couple of other ideas. Unless, Linda, do you have a question?
No, I just put my camera on so that you can see me. I think we all need to practice now, Mark. We have so many notes now. All we need to practice, and eventually we have to resume and say what went good and what was good and what actually didn't work.
And then you can throw criticism at me in our next session.
But yeah, it's all very valid, and it's good to have some practical example, but this can only come when we start to practice and we start to put because we have relationship every single day, but sometimes we do stuff automatically and we actually don't have this awareness to say I should have done it better. Or also this of the feedback is always, in my case of academia, is always a criticism, but actually you can also flip it and make it into a constructive feedback. So I think we are all kind of lost because we actually need to practice and put awareness in our relationships.
So important. You know, I was working recently. I work with one of the business schools, and I was in a workshop with people from the business school a few months ago, and it included people responsible for security, people responsible for cleaning, academics, a whole range of administrators and so on. And at some point, one of the cleaning women, they tend to be women, put her hand up and she said, you know, I've worked at this place for 20 years. I was talking with them about the kind of things we've been speaking about, valuing your colleagues and so on. I've been here for 20 years and nobody has ever said thank you. Because I think when she said she was one of the cleaners, I said, well, thank you for all you've done for the business school for so long. And she was almost in tears, saying that in 20 years in the business school, nobody had ever said thank you or anything appreciative to her for the work that she'd been doing. She'd seen managers come and go, heads of school come and go, and everybody would just walk past her because she's a cleaner. And she probably knows, she actually did know a lot of things that needed to be fixed and improved in the business school that other people would never have seen. It's that question of what you see is from the angle where you sit.
Yeah.
And I thought, isn't it tragic that we have organizations, it's actually a good business school, but organizations like this where this can happen. We need to really connect with the people around us and to be able to solve problems, to be able to fix things, to be able to move forward and learn together. Because everybody has a view these days. Everybody, wherever they sit in the organization, has a view, and often an important view about what needs to be done or what needs to be fixed or changed. So I think this idea of creating positive and productive working relationships with everybody, not just being selective of the people who are going to help you or who can recognize you or give you promotion. You need to have those positive and productive working relationships with everybody around you at all levels, up and down, sideways. This is the managing up, managing down, managing sideways idea of it. Is so valuable and so important.
There is
Linda,
a question now.
that's what I'm saying.
I'm okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? I've been talking a lot. Hope it's okay. The idea of, I'd say something else about the idea of positive and productive working relationships, which comes down to even just recognizing and helping people to feel valued around you. That when things go wrong or when things are difficult, which sometimes happens at work, having those relationships is going to enable you to have the chance to resolve conflict, to manage difficult situations, to be able to plan together how to move out of complexity or conflict. The grounding your working relationships, sometimes when times are better, is a good investment in the future, because you never know when things are going to get difficult or problematic. When conflict develops, if there's no relationship, it's much harder to manage the conflict or the challenge that is faced at a particular time. No understanding. And I mean, this is a global problem. We see it in conflicts around the world where people don't understand each other, are not seeking to understand each other, don't care about other people. And as soon as something goes wrong, then you end up with world war. And it's easy to be critical of countries and political leaders around the world who are unable to manage effective problem-solving, conflict management strategies. We have to be able to do it ourselves. It's so important. And we've made some good progress in South Africa in managing relationships effectively when we come from different backgrounds and places and so on. This is the work of the world, and this is the work of organizations. We have to be able to manage these relationships in a way that enables us ultimately to resolve conflict and to move forward together. The starting point is to build the relationships, because if you wait for the conflict to start, it's often too late. The time to start it is now, really. And it's hard work, but it's a lot less hard than managing the conflict down the road, believe me. So work on the relationships as you do the work together. It's those two things go in parallel, as I spoke about earlier. Yeah. Questions? Okay, well, look, we're moving towards 2:30. Maybe what we can do is hear from a few of you in terms of what you take out from the session that we've had today. What has been important for you? This will be important for Natalie and for me, for the GSSA to hear. What are we taking out of these sessions? The feedback for us is also really important. Kemoretse, thank you. You say, good question, by the way. I just want to know in the chat, I just want to know if feedback can be misleading or if it's always correct. It can be misleading. And sometimes you can receive feedback that you don't really think is valid or not helpful for you. Certainly that can happen. Or it can only give you a partial picture sometimes. So it's not always correct. And I think this is one reason why it is incredibly valuable to get lots of feedback from people around you on a continuing basis, because it will give you a filter for knowing what is real and what is consistent feedback that you are getting, as opposed to just sometimes a once-off piece of feedback that you don't recognize or doesn't seem helpful for you. So you don't have to accept every piece of feedback. But if you get consistent feedback, that's much more helpful and much more useful, because it seems that a number of people might have recognized an area where you can strengthen your work or improve or something like that. So I would look for regular and consistent feedback as being the most useful. I hope that's helpful. Good question. You don't always have to accept all the feedback that you are given, but I would be reluctant to discard feedback. If you're getting consistent messages, then it's probably there's something there that is important for you to hear and to take on board. Other feedback for the session today, anyone? I don't mind, you can be critical, you can be negative, it also helps me to learn. Any other feedback?
I think everyone's in the January defrost.
Yeah, we're all in the afternoon graveyard shift as well. But look, maybe I could ask you if you do have any particular feedback, if you want to send a note through to Natalie or Nolene from GSSA, then that's very helpful always to get. So don't be afraid to send a message through if you have any thoughts about the session or any particular learnings you take out of it. That's incredibly valuable. Natalie's email is there in the chat. Thanks, Natalie. So please do take advantage of that. The feedback, just as I've been talking about how important it is for all of you, it's also important for all of us as well who facilitate these conversations and make them possible. Having that feedback helps us also to keep these sessions relevant and useful for you. Natalie, I think we'll bring it to a close then. I don't know if you have any thoughts. The next session is when exactly?
Oh, I must just double check quickly. I do have it.
Just
But
going
in
to
the
check.
meantime, yes, thank you very much again, Mark, for your time. You keep coming back. We enjoy it. So the next mentoring session is on Thursday, the 6th of June, which is titled, let me just remind everyone,
Yeah, Thursday,
Emotional
6th of
Intelligence. Yeah.
Emotional intelligence. Okay, thank you very much, Natalie. That's great.
So same time, it's Thursday, the 6th of June, at 1 o'clock, and we will see you all there.
Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Thanks, people. Thanks, Shadrach. Yeah.